Did Apple just destroy Steve Jobs' legacy? A big change in the new iPhone has been revealed. Apple will pay you to use this feature. And Apple is finally making a foldable. What's up? My name's Royce and welcome to Apple Next, where we talk about all the top Apple news of the week. Now let's get into it. First up, it looks like Apple's making a big switch up with this new accessory. According to reports, it looks like Apple's working on an Apple Pencil specifically for the iPhone. Now this is big news for anyone who remembers Steve Jobs introducing the original iPhone back in 2007. He notoriously made a joke about no longer needing styluses, and styluses are lame because now we all got a stylus with our finger. And just like with the classic BlackBerry physical buttons, people refused to believe that touchscreens were going to take over. Turns out they were wrong. But unlike the BlackBerry physical buttons, styluses have found a way to survive through this evolution of technology. And I think a lot of credit should go to Samsung with their S Pen to show that there's still a lot of day-to-day use cases for styluses and that a lot of people just still love them. And obviously Apple has already taken a step back from those original Steve Jobs quotes with the introduction of the Apple Pencil for the iPad, but they still have been particularly stubborn with bringing the Apple Pencil to the iPhone. So if these rumors are true, I think it'll just be a hilarious kind of full circle moment for Apple. And it looks like with this new Apple Pencil, it'll be designed specifically for the iPhone. So it looks like some of the technology in the iPad's Apple Pencil will not be present, but it'll be a lot smaller and a lot more affordable. As people are speculating, it'll be around $49 as opposed to the $99 for the Generation 1 Apple Pencil and $129 for the Gen 2 Apple Pencil. And I think that's really smart on Apple's part because now you go into the Apple store, you buy an iPhone and they hit you with like, oh, but hey, you can get the new Apple Pencil. It's only 50 bucks. And you're like, oh, of course. Why wouldn't I? So me personally, I would definitely get one of these, even though I don't really need it. Most people don't really even need a stylus. Obviously for artists and stuff, it's really great. But most of us, I think we just use it just to make us look more productive and important when we're like, oh yes, yes, emails. But I think it'll just be another accessory that we've all wanted Apple to make for a long time. And now they're finally listening and they'll take more of our money. And speaking of iPhones, we got another rumor regarding what the new iPhone 15 Pro design is going to be like. Now, last week we talked about the speculated new periscope lens that the iPhone 15 Pro Max is going to have. So if you haven't seen that video, definitely go back and check that out. But this week has to do with more of the actual design of the iPhone 15 Pro and more specifically the buttons. So it seems with these new Pro models, Apple is going to get rid of the volume buttons and the mute switch toggle. And they're going to be replacing it with one single button that's going to be deemed the action button. Now, if this sounds familiar, it's because they already have a similar button on the Apple Watch Ultra, which is really cool because that one button can be programmed to do a bunch of different things. So it seems like Apple's taking that concept and now putting it on the phone. So now this one action button can be used to control the volume and take a photo from the Photos app, and it can be customized as a shortcut to launch a specific app that you might like. And most importantly for me, and I think a lot of you guys will relate, this will drastically simplify the steps needed to actually shut down and restart your phone without accidentally triggering SOS. And looking from it from a deeper standpoint, I think this is Apple's next step into eventually making the all glass iPhone where it's just a screen, no buttons, no charging ports or anything. So, but before we get there, they're like, all right, let's just reduce the amount of buttons. We already got rid of the home button. Everybody was upset, but now they're cool. There still will be a power button, right? So it's looking like there'll still be two buttons, at least on the sides of the phones, but it just makes sense that this is going to be the natural progression for them. And I know we've been giving the iPhone 15 Pro models a lot of love, but there are some rumors too regarding just the regular iPhone 15 and 15 Plus and what we can expect from them. And the first being that these models are now going to get the dynamic island that you find on the iPhone 14 Pro models, which is just the sleeker, more interactive notch that we see at the top. And this is no surprise, right? Apple always introduces something new and cool in their most expensive models, and then eventually it just all trickles down and just becomes the standard. And with that progression, it's also rumored that the 15 and 15 Plus are now going to get the frosted glass back that was just secured for the Pro models. So now you can feel even better about it now that the cheaper models are going to have that nice sleek feel and design. But of course, Apple still has to have the Pro model stand out in some way. And so it looks like the 15 Pro models will have a new aluminum frame. So it'll be really interesting to see how that looks. Next up, it looks like a huge upgrade is coming with iOS 17. So we all know the behemoth that is the App Store, right? It's the place we go to download all of our favorite apps. It's helped transcend technology with the tagline, there's an app for that. And for us as consumers, it's just been very iconic. Now that's not to say the App Store doesn't have its flaws. Specifically with developers have clashed with Apple over a lot of their practices and how a lot deem them to have a stronghold over the app market. And a big one being that Apple takes a 30% cut of any in-app purchase that is made in the App Store. And obviously that sounds great for Apple, but that's not so great for the developer. And a lot of companies have tried to push back on this for years. Most notably, Epic Games, the creators of Fortnite. Now, they made a huge move a couple years ago and redirected their in-app purchases to their own kind of home base where they can retain all of that money. Now that goes against the App Store rules, so Apple had them kicked out. Long story short, they got into a lawsuit. Epic Games is claiming them to be a monopoly. They have a chokehold on the industry. Apple's like, hey, this is our App Store, our rules, and now Fortnite is no longer in the App Store, and they're still fighting that fight till today. And the same goes for Google and Google Play as well. They're both kind of in that same boat. But the difference is with Google and Android, a lot of apps that you may not find in Google Play, you can sideload them through other means, through other apps or other websites. But with Apple, they have it closed off where you cannot do that for the most part. But thanks to some new EU regulations, Apple is now being forced to allow sideloading on their apps. So now Epic Games, if they want to, they can allow people to download Fortnite instead of from the App Store. They can now download it straight from their website. And for anyone who uses a desktop, this should sound like a no-brainer because we could do this easily on our computers without even thinking about it. But Apple has put tighter restrictions on the phones, claiming that allowing sideloading drastically increased the risk of downloading harmful apps. Your data can get leaked, things like that, since our phones is where we store all our most precious information. And now the thing is, there's no regulations that have happened in the US. This is just mainly in Europe. So technically Apple could just allow this to be available in Europe and nowhere else. But knowing Apple, their whole big thing is they want parity, right? They want this nice, cohesive software that just works. So I highly believe that since they have to implement this feature, they're gonna make it available for everybody. Now I'm sure Apple being Apple as well, they're gonna find a way to still find some way to control somewhat of the experience. But the fact that we're even here now talking about it, I think is a huge win for consumers and a huge win for developers. And I think it'll be a huge win for Apple because that's one less reason to argue on why not to get an iPhone now that it's able to do it. And next up, Apple just made it a lot easier for you to save your money because as of today, if you are an Apple Card holder, you can now open a savings account right from the Wallet app. And this is really cool because now our daily cash back rewards can be redirected into this savings account without us even having to think about it. And on top of that, the APY is pretty high with it currently being at 4.15%. And I do think this is really cool, especially if it's used as a set it and forget it situation. You can deposit money into the account from your other bank accounts if you want, but I just see it as like, just let the money just start kind of stacking up. And without me even thinking about it, I'm gonna use my Apple Card when I make certain purchases, try to get that 3% cash back. So I know that's going into my savings account. And now I can just monitor all of it just from the Wallet app. I think that's huge. And yes, we can monitor our other banking accounts through all our different apps that we have. It really starts to really shift things once players like Apple start getting into this playing field. Because now it's like, okay, are we eventually gonna start seeing a checking account? Is Apple just gonna become its own bank on the side? And it's just all integrated into the phone. We don't have to think about purchase or anything. Everything's just fully like tied into one. That's scary, but also kind of cool. Next up, Google is playing nice with Apple and finally letting us control their Nest thermostat with our iPhones. Starting today, April 18th, which is the day that I'm filming this, Google is sending out an update to their Nest thermostats that will include Matter support. Now, Matter is a new home industry standard backed by all the top names, Apple, Google, Amazon, Samsung, that in theory will allow every single smart home device to work with any of those platforms. Everyone will finally be able to get along. And Google is really taking the biggest first step, I believe, in this by allowing Matter support with their Nest thermostats, because now it will be compatible with Apple's Home app. Now, this is huge because if you're like me and like Nest thermostats but had an Apple device, you probably ended up going with a different solution or getting it and then just, working through the kinks. But now that it's fully supported, I want to run to Best Buy this instant and get a Nest thermostat. So that tells you all it needs to tell you. And I'm sure this is just the beginning. It won't be long until Google starts applying this same update to all their other smart home devices. And then other companies will start following suit as well. And lastly, Apple is finally giving in and making a foldable, but it's probably not the foldable that you want. Now, it seems Apple is going to dip their toes into the foldable market by making a foldable iPad first. I know when we hear foldable, we immediately think, oh, a foldable iPhone, this is gonna be great. But from Apple's perspective, this is still such a new market, a niche market, that they're going to go at a very slow pace. And a smart way to do that is test it on an iPad, see how people actually respond to it. And according to these reports, it looks like they're gonna increase the screen to around 20 inches. So that'll give you a lot of screen real estate once it's open, and then when it collapses, it'll still be portable. So when you think about a MacBook Pro that has a 16-inch screen, now, you can kind of get into your mind, like when you unfold that thing, how big that is, and then folding it, if they can keep that compact, that could be really interesting. And with it being that size, if we even think about it, not just unfolding this way, but even unfolding that way, it could be a situation where half of the iPad is the screen and then the bottom half is some type of touchscreen keyboard, which would be really cool. We've seen patents where Apple is playing with the idea of having like an all glass keyboard. So this could be kind of that actually coming into fruition. And once you get all that data, you then apply it to the Mac daddy of all Apple devices, which is the iPhone. And the reason why I say it's smart to start off with the iPad first is there's less risk there. Because if you start off with the iPhone, you throw it out there, people don't buy it, bam, all of a sudden, foldable iPhones suck. Apple's doomed. But the iPad, it does get to act as like a beta device. You can test it, see what works, what doesn't work. If people don't buy it, you're like, oh, hey, you know what? We tried. But if it is a big success, then you're like, all right, cool, let's move on. Let's throw this into the phone, which is the complete opposite of the strategies of other companies where they're starting off with foldable phones first, and that will eventually trickle down into their tablets and things like that. And people do like the idea of a foldable phone. There is a market for it, but I just don't think it's big enough yet to justify Apple spending all this money on making a dedicated line for that. Because I do think for a lot of people, it's just that nostalgia, that feeling of being able to flip open and close your phone, the hearing that like click, that snap, like you can't beat that, right? Like that was so cool. Or like the Sidekick, right? How it would flip out, you know, and Sidekick users, y'all finessed the system. You made that phone look so cool. I ended up getting one eventually in high school. And then I realized after I flipped this out like 4 times and I use aim for like 2 seconds, this phone really is trash. But flipping it was fun while it lasted. So I think Apple's just gonna take a step back, see how people react to these other products that other companies are doing, throw in, you know, their 2 cents with the iPad, get some feedback from that, and then they'll make a move accordingly. And tying it back to the Apple Pencil for iPhone, I think timing-wise, it works out perfectly. You throw that in first, get people used to that. Then once the foldable iPhone comes around, you now have this like complete productivity package. And that's all the Apple news I have for the day. I'll catch you on the next one.